Our next candidate, Byron Horner.
So, my name is Byron Horner, and I would be honored to serve as your member of parliament. I believe everybody up here with me today is community-minded and cares deeply about the island. But only one of us can provide effective representation and real results in Ottawa. It has nothing to do with my education, my legal experience, my business experience, and everything to do with the reality of our political system and the historic voting pattern in our area. The Conservative Party is the only party that can elect an MP here and form government in Ottawa. Islanders understand that opposition MPs cannot deliver $1 of discretionary spending for recreational and economic infrastructure. They understand that the government of the day controls the budget, and they understand that opposition, private members' motions don't change any laws and don't provide any funding to help us here in our community. For the last 22 months, I've crisscrossed the region. I've personally knocked on over 9,000 doors, meeting locals, talking to them about the issues that are important to them. Islanders feel incredibly ignored in Ottawa and incredibly disappointed in the Trudeau Liberal government, whether it's the ethical breaches, whether it's the tax hikes, and whether it's the $71 billion in new debt that the Liberals have put on. Islanders know that the endless deficits proposed by the Liberals, the Greens, and the NDP will lead to more taxes or to cuts for the core services that we depend on. There's an affordability crisis in our communities, and the new Conservative government has a series of tax cuts, tax credits, and housing measures that will put thousands back in your pockets each year. We also have a plan to fight climate change that's focused on green technology, not taxes. Canada is responsible for only 1.6% of global emissions. We cannot win the fight against climate change by taxing within our borders. A Conservative government will significantly tighten emission standards for major polluters.
Thank you.
And will develop green technology to export. Thank you.
Our next candidate is Barb Biley.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I am one of 50 candidates running for the Marxist-Leninist Party in this election, 25 men and 25 women. Our party's program is a program to humanize the natural and social environment, and we are issuing a call to Canadians in this election to reject all the false promises that someone else is going to solve the problem for you, and encourage everyone to speak in their own names, present their own demands, and fight for what it is they need from the society. It's really good to follow Byron because he explained the situation extremely well. He says opposition MPs cannot deliver, which means that you're nothing if you don't vote for the governing party. You can't know who the governing party is going to be before the election. So you're asked to stand back and be spectators and try and figure out in this mess. If any of you watched the debate the other night, if you were not too embarrassed to watch the debate the other night, you're supposed to figure out from that schmozzle who's going to be the leader and then park your vote there, so hoping that something will trickle down to you. It's not democracy. It is anti-democratic in the extreme. The concept of parties coming to power and then doing whatever they please with no ability of the citizens to recall, to institute legislation, to hold anyone accountable is a something that belongs to another century, when women weren't people, when First Nations weren't people, when only people who were people were rich white men of property. We don't have that situation in our country now. Our democracy, our political system does not suit a modern Canadian democratic society. And the way we're going to change it is to reject the false promises, the promise that I'm really good and the other guys are really bad, and I'm out of time.
Thanks, Barb. Our next candidate, Joel Gowans.
Hello. I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognize we're on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nations. My name is Jonah Gowans. I am 26 years old. I'm really looking forward to tonight because I'll get to make some new memories in this gym, I've coached basketball here 6 times, and I've yet to win, so I'm kind of looking forward to tonight. I was raised in a service-oriented family, very much so. My father is a volunteer firefighter. He taught me that putting it all on the line for my community was important. My mother, an interpreter for the deaf, taught me that you can put your talents to work for others. Those are things that I try to bring to life every day, wherever I go. Politics, to me, is about service. That's a core principle that's guided me for the past 15 years to be in front of you tonight. A politician told me at 11 years old, politics was how he felt he could help the most amount of people in the shortest amount of time. That thought stuck with me, obviously, as I'm here tonight. I look forward to listening to you all tonight, hearing your concerns, and talking to you about the Liberal plan forward, discussing affordability and the environment here in the Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah. And our final speaker, Sean Wood.
I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded territories of the Comox First Nation. I'd like to thank Bill and the Chamber for having us this evening. I'm from Orillia, Ontario, originally. If you know your Canadian geography, it's the home of Gordon Lightfoot and Stephen Leacock back east. I thought I was only going to come out to BC for one season snowboarding in 1993, but I quickly fell in love with the mountains and the ocean. I still remember driving up the Howe Sound on a bus and just being amazed at the beauty that's here. My wife is a registered nurse. We were both working in the Lower Mainland, and our first child was on the way, and we're looking at the real estate prices over in Vancouver, and they're exorbitantly expensive, and we couldn't afford anything there. And so we were looking around as to where we could find an affordable home to raise our 2 kids. And right now we have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old boy, 2 boys, and we live in Parksville, and we found a home that's affordable. And that's why I know that it's really important to keep things affordable so people can live in beautiful places like our riding. I'm a graphic designer by trade. I've worked for a couple of larger companies. I was fortunate enough to be able to start my own business. And in my work, you have to work with the client to create a logo or a magazine ad, whatever it might be. They know their business, so I listen to what they need, and then together we come to a solution that's going to work best for them. If I was your MP, I'm going to listen to what you know best, your problems, and hopefully we can come together and find a creative solution. And that's what I do in my work, and that's what I want to do as your MP. To correct Bill, my introduction, I'm not currently a volunteer firefighter. I spent 5 years being a volunteer firefighter with the Parksville Fire Department. I'm proud to do that. And it's not convenient to be a volunteer firefighter. Your pager goes off in the middle of the night, and you go to try to help someone at possibly their worst hour. And that's just another way I want to serve you, is help people and meet them in their needs. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. We'll now enter into the question and answer period. Basically, what happened is that the BC Chamber of Commerce sends out policies and positions in terms of things that affect the business community in British Columbia. There's a mix of questions tonight that are from local residents who submitted written requests for questions to the Chamber of Commerce, and some of those BC policy questions. To all of you that took the time to respond and ask your questions, they were reviewed, they were interesting, and hopefully yours was one of the ones that was used tonight. The first question, we'll start at my immediate left and start with Barb, and we'll work our way down the table with each question. The first question is, we continue to see a skills crunch in many sectors and regions. Attracting and training a workforce is often challenging, especially for small businesses. If elected, what will be the economic priorities for your government to help small businesses grow sustainably across British Columbia?
So I don't have a specific answer to that question. Skills crunch, I'm not sure. I know from my experience in healthcare, so it's usually best to talk about things that you know about. From my experience in healthcare, we have a shortage of care aides, we have a shortage of kitchen staff, we have a shortage of housekeepers. And in particular in the Comox Valley, the biggest shortage is at the Comox Valley Seniors Center, or Seniors Village. Comox Valley Seniors Village has recently been taken under administration by the Vancouver Island Health Authority because it is not meeting its mandate and its responsibilities to the seniors it takes care of. And I'm almost out of time. This is ridiculous. The skills shortage has to do with wages, it has to do with education and training, it has to do with affordable housing in the communities. I believe if those problems were addressed, you would not have a skills shortage. There has to be coordination between the educational institutions and those that need employees, and I'm out of time.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
So I'm very proud of the Liberal record on this. We have cut small business taxes from 11 to 9% already. I think that there are a few key ways that we can help businesses going forward and workers as well. We're going to cut clean tech companies' taxes by 50%. That'll help them be competitive in the market, and a lot of them are small businesses. As well, we want to work on the help workers come along into this new economy that we're building. So we're going to put money into retraining and helping them be a skilled worker in the new economy. Finally, apprenticeships has been a main struggle. So we're going to guarantee work for apprentices so that they can get through their apprenticeships to become journeymen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah. Byron?
Small business is the backbone here on the island. In the last 4 years, the Trudeau Liberal government have not been kind to them. They hiked the payroll tax. They had an unprecedented tax hike in 2017. A new Conservative government will repeal Trudeau's tax increases on small business investments. We're going to also exempt spouses from Trudeau's tax increases on small business dividends. We're also going to reduce federal regulation by 25% just to make it easier for small business to fill out their taxes and to conduct their business. We need to support small business. They're a huge job creator here on the island, and that's what a new Conservative government will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
Yeah, thank you. Some policy initiatives that we've been championing are, we want to cap merchant fees. We're at 1%. We're paying some of the highest merchant fees in the world, actually 5 times what they are in Europe, 3 times what they are in Australia, which is a huge cost to retailers especially. We want to make sure that when you sell a business to someone in your family that you're not paying more. Right now, you're getting penalized when you're selling your business to someone within your own family, and that shouldn't be happening. Housing and childcare, and they're the biggest barriers right now to business in the Comox Valley and throughout our riding. They're huge. You can't recruit staff because they're not available. You can't grow your business. So we need to invest in non-market affordable housing and safe and affordable accessible childcare. And of course pharmacare and dental care, because it's a huge cost to small business. And we in our policy and in our platform, we want to invest in a pharmacare plan for all and a dental care plan for all. Those are important.
Thank you, Gord. John?
So the Green Party would establish Green Venture Capital Fund to support small local green business startups, and the Green Venture Capital Funding Program to provide matching federal funds for locally raised venture capital. Those are 2 specific things we would do. I run a small sole proprietorship myself, and I know how important small business is. I think small businesses, I agree, are the backbone to our economies. I don't think tax cuts will help flow money into communities. I think if you can subsidize with more affordable housing, with pharmacare, with dental care, that is money that goes back into the communities instead of cutting taxes. That won't give people a head start. And I think flowing money into communities will help those small businesses where we live.
Thank you. The next question is, by increasing capital cost allowances and eliminating GST for the purpose-built rental housing, the federal government can dramatically increase the supply and profitability. Will your government increase tax incentives to encourage the much-needed construction of purpose-built rental housing? And we'll start with Jonah.
We're going to invest in making housing more affordable, and to do that, we've got to incentivize builders to build housing. That is just a fact of life. So specifically, what we want to see is houses that are emissions neutral. That is the focus that we would like to see. So we're going to give a $5,000 grant to homes that are built towards that goal in mind, specifically. And all of the housing will fall under the National Housing Strategy, which was introduced in 2017. A $55 billion investment across the country in housing for Canadians. I think that showed leadership, and I think you should trust the Trudeau government for the next 4 years to continue to do so. Thanks.
Thank you. Byron?
So we have a series of measures to help with housing affordability. The question, though, that you asked was about, should we bring back the accelerated cost allowance for purpose-built rental buildings? This was something that was in effect from the late 50s till about 1972, and about 70% of all rental buildings in Canada were built during this time. What it means is if you own one building or two buildings and you build a new one, you can write off the cost of the new build against your income from your other buildings very quickly. So it incentivizes developers to build more supply, which is a key part of the question. We're also going to look at all surplus federal land. And here on the island, there's a lot of surplus federal land that we could contribute towards affordable housing just to help with the housing problems in all of our communities across this riding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
Yeah, I just, when I hear the Liberal plan, it's a 10-year plan, it's back-ended. I mean, they don't understand the sense of urgency that's happening in our communities. I'm hearing of people living in their trailers, worried about being pushed out on the street. A lot of single women are falling through the cracks and have nowhere to go, especially. We're committed to doubling the home buyer's tax credit, $1,500 for first-time home buyers, and removing the GST on new rental units. But what we really need we need just, when I hear the Liberal plan, it's a 10-year plan, it's 10% of our housing was non-market housing. They don't understand now we're at less than 4%. In Europe, it's 30%. I'm hearing of people living in their trailers, worried about being pushed out on the street. I grew up in a lot of single women are falling through the cracks. And we have to accelerate. And our commitment is to build 500,000 units. We're committed to over the next 10 years. Doubling the home buyer's tax credit. And we have to get started right away and show people that we mean it. And that means a sense of urgency. Everybody deserves a safe, secure place to live. Just, when I hear the Liberal plan, it's a 10-year plan.
Thank you, Gord.
Housing was non-market housing. They don't understand. Now we're at less than 4%.
I'm going to agree with Gord on the non-market housing.
It worked. I grew up in a lot of single women are falling through. And we have to accelerate. Our commitment is to build 500,000 units. We're committed to over the next 10 doubling the home buyer's. We have to get started right away and show people that we mean it. And that means a sense of urgency. Everybody deserves a safe, I just, when I hear the Liberal plan, it's a 10-year plan.
Thank you, Gord.
Affordable housing.
They don't understand. Now we're at less than 4%.
I'm going to agree with Gord on the non-market housing.
I grew up in a lot of single women are falling through. We have to accelerate. Our commitment is to build 500,000 units over the next 10 doubling the home buyer's. We have to get started right away and show people that we mean it. And that means a sense of urgency. Everybody deserves a safe. I just, when I hear the Liberal plan, it's a 10-year plan.
Thank you, Gord.
Affordable housing.
They don't understand. Now we're at less than 4%.
I'm going to agree with Gord on the
It worked. I grew up in a lot of single women and we have to accelerate. Our commitment is to build 500,000 units over the next 10 doubling. We have to get started right away.
Investment in social housing through promoting of co-op housing. And the specifics are different in different communities. The needs in Tofino are not the same as the needs in Montreal. I'd like to talk about seniors housing in the Comox Valley, because this is a scandal that's been going on for 50 years, literally 50 years. Home care and residential care for seniors and the ability for seniors to stay in their homes is a crisis in this community, and it should not be left up to organizations like Glacier View Lodge, who has made a very significant proposal recently to provide some mixed housing on the land that they own. But it should be a federal government responsibility, not left to the communities to figure out how to afford it themselves.
Thank you, Barb. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce is asking for a nonpartisan Royal Commission on tax reform. Administrative costs are high to run our current tax system. The current tax code is too complicated, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. If elected, would you support a review and simplification of the current income tax system? And we'll start with Byron.
So reforming the tax code is not something that's currently in the Conservative Party's plan. Obviously, we're always open to suggestions to reduce regulation to make it easier for small business and Canadians to fill out their own tax forms, but we don't have a specific plan to review it. We're open to the suggestion and working with the Canadian Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. Gord?
Yeah, I mean, it was Jack Layton that proposed that we reduce small business taxes from 11 to 9%, something that it was great to see. We followed through. I mean, the Liberal government wasn't going to honor it. They were in quicksand when they rolled out their failed rollout of their small business proposals, and we pushed really hard, and they followed through to move it from 11 to 9%. But we do need an overhaul of our tax system. Right now, there's legal loopholes where, you know, the super rich can move their money out of this country without paying their fair share of taxes like you do. CEOs get a tax break when they have a big win that you don't get. That's not fair. Our proposal is to tax the super rich. If you've got over $20 million in wealth, every million over, we want 1%, to redistribute, to pay for non-market housing, to pay for pharmacare for all, to pay for dental care for all. And that's priced out at $70 billion by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. But the whole system needs an overhaul. It's rigged for the wealthy and the well-connected.
Thank you, Gord. Sean?
The question is about simplifying the tax code. There's nothing in the Green Party plan to simplify the tax code, but there are things in the Green Party plan to find money that's leaking out of the system. So we would like to raise taxes on large corporations to the same levels that the United States has. We would also like to close tax loopholes. You remember the Panama Papers? We would like to find that money, including some interest on that. Tax commercial banks. We'd also like to tax e-commerce companies like Netflix, Amazon that are doing big business in Canada without paying their taxes. So to say that the Green Party is going to bankrupt you is not true. We are going to find the money that's leaking out of the system, and that's how we can pay for a lot of the stuff that should be going on in society right now.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
So I think we should abolish taxes altogether. The concept of income tax, the concept that if you want social programs like housing, like education, like healthcare, you have to pay for it, is an upside down concept. The wealth that's produced in our society has to be divided amongst the workers who produce the wealth, the government which administers social programs like housing, education, and healthcare, and those who have made the investments. Those who have made the investments should not be able to make all the decisions as to how much wealth they get and the rest trickles down to the rest of us. It should be turned upside down. The amount that's needed for social programs should be taken at the point of production out of that portion of the social wealth that is produced by the workers.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
I'm going to echo mostly what we've heard. It's definitely not in the platform at the moment, but everyone tells me to be the CLO, Chief Listening Officer. That's my job, supposedly. So I hear that from the chamber, and I hear these are some of the experts saying this is something they'd like to see. I'm prepared to at least listen to you and hear that out and bring those concerns forward and have them discussed beyond here. I think that that's the next step. The chamber is the experts saying this is something they'd like to see. Let's at least consider the idea.
Thank you, Jonah. Close to 17% of Canada's population is 65 years or older. By 2031, StatsCan projects that 1 in 4 Canadians will be seniors. If elected, how would you advocate for a national senior care strategy that sets consistent standards of care and staffing levels as a condition of federal funding similar to the Canadian Health Act across the country? And we'll start with Gord.
Yeah, so you're in this riding especially, it's really pertinent. I mean, I think we've got the highest median age in the country in Qualicum Beach, and the second highest in Parksville. So it is important. A lot of people come here to retire, and it's our duty to take care of seniors. And we haven't seen the investments when it comes to dealing with caregivers. And we need a national senior strategy to ensure that seniors and their caregivers are treated with the dignity they deserve. And also making sure that, again, that they've got affordable and accessible medicine. We hear of people, cutting up their pills to make sure that they have their medicine, or choosing between rent or food, and that's unacceptable in a country like ours. So we've got to make sure that we include in our healthcare plan dental and eye and ear care, so people aren't using their credit card, but they're using their health card when they have health needs. So we can do both in terms of looking after caregivers and making sure we're looking after our seniors.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, so we just kind of went over where we can find the money to pay for some of this stuff, and a lot of the problems that people have are making ends meet. And if we consider that people don't have to use their credit card for pharmacare, if there is more affordable housing for people, if they don't have to pay for dental care if they make less than $70,000 a year, and if we look at a guaranteed livable income, these are things that can really help people make ends meet. And it also lets them know that we care. I think that this is the country that most of us want to live in. We don't want to live in a country where we're stepping over people on the way to work that slept on the street, whether they be seniors or otherwise. I think we all want to live in a country that we are helping those people get back on their feet.
Thank you. Barb?
With 1 minute, I'm going to be very, very specific. Comox Valley Seniors Village receives the same amount of funding per resident as Glacier View Lodge does. One is a private for-profit corporation, one is a not-for-profit. One has to report, that is Glacier View Lodge, on how they spend their money. One does not have to report, that is Comox Valley Seniors Village. Comox Valley Seniors Village is owned by Retirement Concepts, which was sold to Anbang, a Chinese insurance company, which has since been taken over by the Chinese government. That sale was approved by the Trudeau Liberal government and rubber stamped by the provincial government. The wages paid at Comox Valley Seniors Village are approximately 22% less than the wages paid at Glacier View Lodge. That is why you do not have proper care, and that should be a criminal offense.
Thank you. Jonah?
I believe we have a duty to our seniors. They've created this nation and brought us to here. I think that we owe it to them to treat their retirements properly. Some of the things we're committed to doing. We're going to raise OAS for those over the age of 75 by $729. We're going to increase survivor benefits for CPP by 25%. And going back to the national housing strategy, I think it needs to put a focus on seniors' housing and making sure that they all have a roof over their head from coast to coast to coast. Finally, Gord mentioned pharmacare. I think that pharmacare is a great idea, and it's a negotiation that's going to have to go on with the provinces. I think that this is a choice, this election, between Andrew Scheer and Justin Trudeau, and who you believe could negotiate with the provinces to actually get pharmacare. I believe in Team Trudeau. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah. Byron?
I've met hundreds of seniors who are struggling with the affordability crisis, going door to door. I met a gentleman in Port Alberni who loves steak, hadn't had a steak in 2 years. I met a woman who timed all her errands to do once to save on gas. We have a series of measures to help seniors to put thousands of dollars more in their pocket each year to help them. Senior and caregivers is also a huge problem. So many seniors I've met, they're worried, how am I going to afford to have care? How am I going to get somebody into my home? There's a shortage of caregivers, which is a tragedy, especially in this riding, as Gord mentioned. It's the oldest median age riding in Canada. We need a national strategy to get accessible health care, to get GPs, to get nurse practitioners in our communities and in the rural communities that make up Courtenay-Alberni. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Given that Canada's debt level has risen despite a relatively strong economy, there is concern about the precedent that has been set for future government funding initiatives. What is your plan to ensure Canada's debt burden remains low and affordable today and for future generations? And we'll start with Sean.
Stand by. So the Green Party has a fully costed platform. You can go online and download it. It went through the Parliamentary Budget Office, and we're not going to increase taxes on lower and middle class people. We are going after people who have, say, over $20 million. If you have a net worth of over $20 million and we raise your taxes 1%, that's $70 billion. So if anyone in this room is worth more than $20 million and you don't want to share 1% of your net worth, maybe you and I could have a little talk afterwards, because I think that you probably have enough that you can share, and with that $70 billion, we can do a lot with it and really help the people who are in need. So we are not looking to increase the deficit. We will have a balanced budget in 5 years. The most honest, ethical, hardworking party leader in Canada has said that, and I am proud to be running for Elizabeth May.
Thank you. Barb?
So I think the question is not of the debt so much as how the economy is organized and in whose interests. Recently, there have been mill closures in British Columbia. The Hammond mill closed in Port Moody, not because it wasn't profitable, but because the owner figured they could get more money for the real estate and would relocate their production into the United States. Closing the mill does not make them lose their timber license. They can still cut logs and ship them out of the country. That is not the way you build an economy that meets the needs of Canadians. If foreign corporations want to invest in Canada, they have to commit to building the jobs in Canada and follow Canadian regulations. It's not so much a matter of debt as how we organize our economy, whether it's to suit the interests of the privileged foreign investors or whether it's to meet the needs of Canadians.
Thank you. Jonah?
So the past 4 years, I believe the government has been a good economic steward. Canada has the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, and it's going to continue to go down over the next 4 years. That's important. I also believe that one of the things we're going to do to raise money, obviously, to pay for what we're going to do, is put a luxury items tax of 10% on things like yachts and planes worth over $100,000. If you can buy a plane, I believe that you can pay an extra 10% on that plane to help this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Byron?
So the Liberals added $71 billion of debt the last 4 years. The NDP and the Greens and the Liberals are talking about 20 to 24 billion in their first year if they were to form a government. The interest payments on our national debt will soon exceed the federal transfers for public health care, even while Comox Valley struggles to find bed to care for our seniors. Nobody takes the NDP and Greens fiscal plan seriously. The NDP haven't even costed their plan for Canadians. And the Green plan, they plan to raise taxes on corporations by 40%,
Thank you, Byron.
not expecting those businesses to change locale and to leave the country.
So we're waiting for the Conservatives to roll out their plan. Everyone's wondering. I mean, this is the same party that is responsible for 2/3 of the federal deficit under Mulroney and Harper. So let's not kid ourselves. We need to close tax havens. We need to stop letting the privileged, the well-connected, and elite get away with not paying their fair share. That's how we're going to deal with our deficit. But our party is like Jonah said, that as long as we're lowering our GDP to debt ratio, we will continue investing in people because it saves us money in the long term. One thing we're not talking about is the environmental deficits due to climate emergencies. The Parliamentary Budget Officer predicted it was going to cost us $900 million a year for climate emergencies 5 years ago. They're actually $1.8 billion. They're saying by 2050 it's going to be $42 billion a year. You think it would be a Conservative Party priority, because they say they're fiscally responsible, to deal with climate change, not tout that it's 1.6% of, we're 1.6% of the footprint globally on greenhouse gas emissions. We're only 0.48%. of the global population. We're laggards. We're tripling our input.
Thank you very much. If elected, you'll be called upon to make decisions on many issues that aren't even necessarily on the horizon today, let alone covered by your party's policy positions. Describe what process you would follow to make such decisions. We'll start with Barb.
Well, I basically reject the whole premise. The problem is that we elect, in our system, we elect political parties that come to power and then do whatever they think is necessary to please those who are actually in control and have the privilege and the economic power to impose decisions on Canada. So parliamentarians aren't making decisions, and least of all, Canadian citizens aren't making decisions. So I really can't comment on a system that makes absolutely no sense. We have to figure out how to change the system so that it's actually Canadians that are the decision makers and not just supplicants to politicians who have to answer to privileged foreign investors.
Thank you. Jonah?
I've been in the room when an MP has had to make a decision going forward. I've volunteered in the PMO. I work at the BC legislature. I've seen them make these decisions, and I've figured out what I liked about when they do that and what I didn't like. My first priority would be obviously to consult locally. You need to know what is the priorities of your local residents. You then need to listen to experts. Those are national experts who can guide you going forward, and you make the best decision for Courtenay-Alberni's long-term future. I think it's a three-step process. Thank you.
Thank you. Byron?
So I've had 20 years of experience in different leadership roles in business. I've been executive director of a not-for-profit. I've had an opportunity to make a lot of different decisions, serving on boards as well of corporations, public companies, and not-for-profits. You see decisions being made, but the key for any decision is to talk to the people who are affected by it. Talk to the local government. Ask them how it's going to affect their communities. Go and meet them, meet the stakeholders. And this is some of the problems that the Liberal government has had here on the island with fisheries. They haven't gone and talked to all the stakeholders, got that local knowledge, talked to the different Indigenous communities, get the full gamut of information before making an informed decision that everybody can get behind.
Thank you, Byron. Gord?
All of my decisions start with the people in our communities. When I got elected, I was tired of being ignored. I didn't hear from my MP. He wasn't out there doing town halls, doing coffee houses. We had 27 town halls, 27 more than the previous MP, 40 coffee houses. I rode the riding, as you may recall, to all 31 communities in our riding to hear what they needed, ask them what they needed, get direction from them. Every day when the House of Commons starts, the speaker starts with the Lord's Prayer, and he takes time for meditation and self-reflection. And I start there. And I think about people in each one of our communities, the people that sent me there. I knew who I'm working for. I'm working for the people in our communities. And every community and every person in this riding counts and in this country counts. And I make sure of letting them know that. Their voice is heard in the House of Commons. I bring their voice to the House of Commons, and I fight for them.
Thank you. Sean?
If you watch C-SPAN, you see bickering and arguing when someone's trying to speak, and I think Canadians deserve government that works together, and I want to be an MP that people enjoy working with, and I think that's how you get things done. I want to listen to the constituents, listen to the concerns. I would love to have municipalities with provinces and the federal government all sitting at the same table so that, Ottawa seems fairly physically removed from the situation all too often, and municipalities are on the front line. I think you have to have a table where everyone is sitting around trying to find solutions, and that's how you're going to have. That's how you're going to get things done that work for the people on the ground. Be someone who other people want to work with. Forget all the negative politics and just be a positive influence on the decision making.
Thank you. The March 2019 federal budget included the first ever commitment to a national school food program. If elected, will you support a cost-shared universal school food program that provides healthy, locally produced food? We'll start with Jonah.
Seeing as we were the ones who tabled this in the budget, I think that it's safe to say that I would vote in favor of this in March 2020 when you've elected me your MP.
Thank you. Byron?
The Conservative Party believes in equality of opportunity for every Canadian. And how can you learn and how can you listen properly in class if you have an empty stomach? So absolutely, we would support this. Food security is a huge issue on Vancouver Island. It's crazy. We only grow about 5% of our food here. That's something I'd like to try to support and understand how a new Conservative government could support more agriculture and more local agriculture here on the island that could support these food programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
Yeah, certainly no child should be going hungry in this country. Absolutely, I support that. We had a bill that went through the House of Commons to celebrate National Food Day, and it ended up in the unelected Senate, and it died because of Conservative senators blocking it. We need to work together. We need to put partisan politics aside when it comes to these issues. And we need to support our farmers. Farmers are having a really difficult time, even getting their food into grocery stores because they need a GAP certificate, which can cost between $2,000 and $10,000 just for them to be able to meet the criteria to end up in a grocery store. So incentives to pay for that and eliminate barriers, invest in rainwater treatment and climate mitigation strategies, because we're heading into a climate emergency. And the people that are going to feel it the most are the most vulnerable, and that's the poor and the people at the bottom that are struggling to make ends meet, especially children that are living in poverty. And we have one of the highest child poverty rates in the province, especially in Port Alberni, where it's over 35%.
Thank you, Gord. Sean?
I had the honor of being a volunteer firefighter, and a lot of people, think firefighters are superheroes, but I think the superheroes are the social workers that see kids that don't have food and don't have even adequate clothes come to school. When I help make my kids' lunches in the morning, I look at what's in there, and it looks fantastic what's in my kids' lunch. But what about the kids who don't have that at school? And we have to find the money to make sure that kids have food at school.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
I'm in support of a school food program with locally sourced food. I think it should also be applied to healthcare institutions. They're some of the biggest consumers of food, and right now we have a situation where food that is purchased by the Vancouver Island Health Authority for Vancouver Island Hospital, some of it comes from as far away as Texas. And we actually shut down the short order at St. Joe's once because we couldn't get hamburger buns because they were coming from the lower mainland. We couldn't go to Thrifty's and get them. I think that if we're serious about food security, we should also push to have Site C canceled.
Thank you, Barb. BC exports are very diversified. In 2014, the United States accounted only for 51% of BC's worldwide exports. The Pacific Rim countries accounted for 37%. Given the recent complications with China, what is your government strategy to conduct trade relations with the Asia Pacific? Are you seeking to normalize relations with China or seek other trade options elsewhere? And we'll start with Byron.
So China is an incredibly important trading partner for Canada. In my work life, I've had a chance to do business in China over 20 times, so I've gotten to know how they do business. We need to try to normalize our trade relations. It's so important for our resource exports, for our wood exports, for our agricultural exports. They want Canadian goods, and we need to try to normalize that. We also need to diversify. Japan is a huge economy as well. Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, they're all growing economies that want Canadian products, want our agricultural products, want our resource products that help support jobs here in Courtenay-Alberni. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gord.
We support trade. I know people don't believe that. They always criticize the NDP, but the reason that we get criticized is we stand up for people. We stand up for jobs, whether it be in the automobile sector or farmers that are, especially when it comes to supply management. We've seen CETA and obviously the new NAFTA, where they're giving away protections of our dairy farmers. We have to protect our food supply, especially those people that have been supplying our food. So making sure that we also are not signing agreements with a blank check that can override Indigenous rights. And that's very important, that we respect the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And also that the investor-state dispute resolutions aren't in those agreements, so that they can sue Canadian communities when they reject an idea of doing business and a development proposal that might come from Asia or China into our country and override our environmental rules and regulations to protect our air, water, and land.
Thank you, Gord. Sean?
We saw on May 6th that Paul Manley was elected down in Nanaimo Ladysmith, and he is our critic on international trade for the Green Party. And just like Gord was saying, there's some agreements that are in motion that would take away a lot of the rights that we think Canadian companies should have. And you know, I think of the raw logs that we ship to China, and I would really like to see us add a lot of value to those logs. Instead of just adding no value and not milling them at all. I think we could really increase the amount of workers we had if we could be creative. You know, Sweden doesn't have great wood like we do, but they thought, hey, why don't we make furniture that people put together themselves? And guess what? It turned out to be pretty good for them. I think there's creative ways to add value to our natural resources instead of just shipping them off without doing anything to them ourselves.
Thank you. Barb?
Yep, both the resources and the labor of Canada can be used to produce wealth, both for Canadian people and for trade, as long as the trade is on the basis of mutual benefit. When we enter into trading arrangements like CETA, like the TPP, like the new NAFTA, they're not based on mutual benefit. They're based on making the biggest buck for the small number of multinational corporations. And we all lose in the process. If we were to develop our resources first to meet our own needs and then engage in trade on the basis of mutual benefit and put an end to the rip and ship economy and put an end to letting the mining companies and forestry companies and others come and rape and plunder and leave with us to clean up the mess, then we can engage in trade with many, many countries on the basis of mutual benefit. And my time's up.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
I'm going to actually agree with Barb for a second here. It should be about getting an equitable deal for Canada. I think that foreign trade is all about your reputation on the international scene and who you believe will fight for you. We've got 4 years of Chrystia Freeland being the leader in this for Canada and for the Liberal Party. I think she's done a very good job. I think Chrystia is incredibly good at her job as well. And I think that you have to take into account something that is in the Conservative platform. I've heard Andrew Scheer say it, that he wants to cut foreign aid by 25%. That will have an effect on our reputation around the globe, and that will have an effect on our ability to free trade around the world.
Thank you, Jonah. Over 40% of all new job openings will require trade and technical training. Some will be among the highest demand jobs in the province. Currently, BC's completion rate is only around 37%. What is your plan to improve the apprenticeship program? And we'll start with Gord.
We've got a great in terms of our platform, we've got a great document. It's called the New Deal for People. It's basically mirroring the Green New Deal, and as well a document called Power to Change to talk about how we can move forward with just transition and move into a new economy that is about climate change. So it's about creating 300,000 new jobs. It's about investing in exactly that, in training and being part of transition. You know, I ran into an oil worker the other day and he says, "You're against me." And I said, "No, I'm for you all the way." And I know a lot of people fly to camp and back that live here in the valley, and that's the jobs that are there now. We need to create new jobs, create jobs here at home in clean energy and investing in clean energy. And the opportunities are there. We can't wait for peak oil. And then there's no jobs and the economy collapses in our oil's priced out because it's cost prohibitive. We need to invest in clean energy now and train people right now and invest in our youth for the future. Let's not wait until the economy changes and we're not prepared.
Thank you, Gord. Sean?
In 1900, there were no cars on the road. And then in about 1913, 1915, there were no horses on the road. Okay? So things can happen pretty quickly when the technology changes. And what we're seeing is the technology change. The tar sands in Alberta, they're break even at $60 a barrel. And right now that's about $48 a barrel. The future price of oil, if it wants to be competitive with technology that's coming, they're predicting about $10 to $15 a barrel for it to be competitive with the technology that's coming. Fossil fuels are done, they're over. We don't need to build a pipeline, we can put that money elsewhere. And we need to be leaders of green technology, solar, retrofitting homes, wind power. There are a lot of cool things that we can start pumping money into and be ahead of the curve instead behind the curve, and still be riding horses when everyone else is in a car.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
Well, this is actually an easy one because the answer to the problem of getting the training and getting the skills needed to do the jobs that are needed are in the hands of the workers who are currently doing the jobs, whether it's construction, healthcare, education, you name it. I could talk to you for hours about the number of proposals that healthcare workers have made to their employers on how to solve the problem of job shortages and job training. VHA, for example, has a policy of cooks have to be Red Seal. But when they don't have a cook who's Red Seal, then they'll train a food service worker and make them a cook. Why can't they do that all the time? Why do they have to have a shortage first and then they adjust their program? So it can't be organized on the basis of opportunism. It has to be organized on the basis of listening to the workers who do the job, who are the ones who are best able to design the programs that are necessary and have the educational institutions provide what is needed.
Thank you. Jonah?
So we've got a bill we want to put forward called the Just Transition Act, which will make sure we invest in those workers to make sure they are ready for the transition that is coming. But specifically to speak to apprenticeships, something that we're guaranteeing in our platform is that lack of hours doing your job will not be the reason why you do not complete your apprenticeship. If you start an apprenticeship, we want to make sure that you will always have the hours necessary to transition from apprentice to journeyman, and make sure that those workers who are currently just workers become a skilled worker. That's the biggest thing that we can do to help those in an apprenticeship. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah. Byron?
One of the reasons I put my name forward is because I have two sons, both in high school, and I'm worried about them and other youth here on the island. We're living such a disrupted economy. When you look at artificial intelligence, robotics, we need to make sure that the federal government shows leadership with the provinces to make sure our kids who are coming through school get the training that they need so that they can adapt to the new economy and to the new reality of our more fragmented trade relations. It's critical that the federal government show leadership from a research standpoint and real dollars to back programs to help give the critical skills we need. This also is reflected in immigration. We need to attract and retain terrific people from all over the world that want to come to Canada and contribute to our economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Byron. If elected, how will you endorse the Affordable Childcare for All plan and work towards implementing the recommendations to make childcare affordable, available, and inclusive of all children? And we'll start with Sean.
We won't talk about kids' lunches yet because we already talked about it. So childcare for all, what it addresses is an affordability problem. And you guys have already heard tonight that the Green Party wants to have housing that's more affordable for people, and that's a great first start. But a guaranteed livable income also helps moms and dads pay for the childcare. And so we can probably make sure that there are dollars there to help them pay for that. And also dental care, again, it just takes another bill off the table that people struggle to make ends meet. So really putting money into people's pockets helps them pay for that childcare that they need before the kids get to go to school age.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
I think childcare should be considered along with education, housing, and healthcare as a social responsibility and a right that everyone has. There are all kinds of statistics that show that when you provide childcare, you have more participation in the economy. So it's pretty irrational to talk about a skills shortage and a shortage of workers on the one hand, and then put obstacles in the path of people who could be doing the jobs where you're moaning and groaning about the skills shortage. So childcare to me is a no-brainer. It should be provided free of charge to everyone who needs it at highest quality, with the childcare workers appropriately compensated and trained.
Thank you. Jonah?
Specifically around childcare, we're committing to creating 250,000 more spaces across Canada. But something else I want to talk about here that I believe is very important is we created the Canada Child Benefit, which has been tremendously helpful here in the riding and has raised 16,000 children out of poverty. One thing we're committed to doing is raising it by another $1,000 for those children who are born 0 to 1 year old. What this is going to do is help people like my friends. My friend Paul has 2 children. Danielle was born less than 6 weeks ago. What that extra $1,000 in my friend's pockets means is that his wife can stay home with the kids. She can be there for that entire first year. Well, on that point, one thing we're committing to make it fairer is 15 weeks maternity leave for foster parents and parents that adopt as well, so that they also get that chance with their children as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Byron?
So as you know, childcare is a provincial area. That being said, the Conservative Party appreciates that there is an affordability crisis. So we've tried to have a series of measures to help families. We're eliminating all tax on maternity leave and paternity leave that will save a family with a newborn up to $4,000. We also have a bunch of different tax credits to help families get ahead, just so they have more money to help pay for childcare. It is a critical issue, but it is a provincial issue. Our whole platform is about putting more money in families' pockets so that they can have more money for things like childcare. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
Well, we're hearing about a lot of, especially women, that are having to make a difficult choice. Of course, it's both men and women that are making a difficult choice whether they're going to stay home and take care of their kids or even have children because of the cost of childcare, especially here in the Valley. It's affecting employers, even services like healthcare, because they can't find staff because there's not enough childcare spaces. I was just at the stroller walk here in Courtenay on the weekend, and we heard stories from people and the challenges they're facing. They need $10 a day childcare. In Quebec, they did it, and 70,000 people went back to work, mainly women. Their GDP went up 2%. It's a huge, important factor for tackling inequality. We need to invest in our children. It's the best investment we're going to make in our future. And the province is looking for a federal partner. So it may be provincial, but they want a federal partner. Our commitment is $10 billion over 4 years in creating 500,000 safe and affordable childcare spaces, and it will transform our country.
Thank you. Over the past 10 years, the Asian Pacific Gateway Initiative and Corridor Initiative have helped grow the economy of BC. If elected, what plans do you have to sustainably invest in Canada's Asian Pacific Gateway, particularly the coastal port and Western Canadian Railroad facilities? We'll start with Barb.
No plan whatsoever. I'll repeat what I said about trade before. I think we should be trading with Asia Pacific. One of the reasons for that trade is because of the proximity to Canada, but I don't want to see us shipping raw logs to the Asia Pacific. I don't want to see us shipping LNG, and I don't want to see us shipping coal. I want to see us trading in finished products that we can produce in Canada that will develop our manufacturing base to benefit both the communities and to be able to provide, to engage in trade with commodities that are needed, but not just ship out our raw resources.
Thank you. Jonah?
So I think it's important to talk about sustainable trade with the Asian Pacific because Asia is, as we all know, the growing market where we want to get our resources to, obviously. I think that here I'm going to have to defer to Chrystia Freeland again and put my trust in the fact that the experts that work in foreign affairs are the best ones to tell us how best to work on that relationship and to continue forward. For me to speculate on what the next step would probably be irresponsible of me. Thank you.
Thank you. Byron?
I've been pushing within my own party to have the Port Alberni Port Authority designated as part of our Pacific Gateway strategy. There's a plan to make it a transshipment hub where container ships would come to Port Alberni with 10,000 units. They'd break them up into 500 units and they'd barge them to all the different logistic points in the Puget Sound and in Vancouver to lessen the congestion that we're seeing in the harbor in Vancouver, the wait time for ships. I'm pushing for a full economic feasibility study to see if this makes sense. If we could lower the per container cost to get things off the island, it would be a huge boon for Vancouver Island. It's one of the biggest barriers for our competitiveness for all finished goods that we make on Vancouver Island, the cost to get it off the island. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
I don't think it's working for everybody. I mean, we saw raw logs go up tenfold in 10 years under BC Liberals and federal Conservatives that did nothing to create more value in our communities. We've never seen anything like this in our history in the last 2 decades, what's happening in our communities. Wealth starts in rural communities, and I know the Conservatives like to talk about rural communities, but they don't show up. Last night they missed the debate in Tofino. People there were upset. We need to make sure that rural communities are getting the support they need to add value. We need to change how we're looking at the Asia Pacific region. I'm also supporting new initiatives that will create jobs in our communities, like a floating dry dock in Port Alberni, so we can do refits in our communities because they're running out of floating dry dock space on our coast. And so a great opportunity for the west coast of Vancouver Island. But certainly my priority as an MP will not be the Pacific Gateway in Vancouver. It'll be about Port Alberni and our riding. That's where I'm going to put my attention.
Thank you. Sean?
Just to touch back on the universal childcare benefit, we heard about tax credits, and not sure how much everyone knows about tax credits, but you have to actually be making the money first and having to be paying taxes, so above the poverty line, for those tax credits to work. And so for the people who need it most, tax credits do not work. Let's go back to shipping of raw logs. We shouldn't be doing that. I already spoke about that tonight. If we think about getting our oil to market, these mystery Asian markets that they're talking about, one tanker in the last year has gone with diluted bitumen to Asia, and the rest is going to the States. We already have an existing pipeline that we bought for $4.5 billion. Asia does not want our diluted bitumen. So we need to be very careful about what we are selling to China, or what we are told we should be selling to China, and make sure we're taking care of Canada first.
Thank you, Sean. What is your party's perspective and approach to poverty reduction, including tax reform and guaranteed annual incomes? Jonah?
So I already touched on this earlier, but the Canada Child Benefit has been tremendously valuable here, specifically in the riding. It has raised 16,000 children just in Courtenay-Alberni alone out of poverty, and 300,000 across the country. On the other side of that is the seniors benefit that I talked about. So OAS is going to go up $729 a year for those over the age of 75, where we see there's a tremendous decrease or increase in the amount of poverty you see in the statistics. Along with that, CPP survivor benefits will go up by 25%, because when you lose your partner, you need that extra funding to make sure. Just because you lost them doesn't mean that your costs went down equal to that loss. And I think it's important to recognize on both ends and make sure we protect our most valuable asset, our children, and help our seniors who have paved the way. Thanks.
Thank you. Byron?
So all the other parties tonight are making these promises on dental care, pharma care, child care, but who's going to pay for it? We've already seen that they're all going to spend over $20 billion. We believe that governments, like families, should try to live within their means. We're not going to touch the Canada Child Benefit. It's the one thing I think the Trudeau Liberals did that I fully support. We're not going to touch senior benefits. We're going to keep OAS at 65, and we're going to increase spending to public health care and to social programs by 3% every year of a new Conservative government. We've committed to that, and we will honor that commitment.
Thank you. Gord?
To clarify, it's about the guaranteed annual income is the question.
Correct.
So a couple of things. First, our promise, yes, we are making promises to invest in people. I know the Conservatives are promising to keep the rich and the well-connected and privileged in place where they are, and we know that they're getting the protections that you don't get, and we'll be fighting that, absolutely. There is a decision that people are going to have to make here. I mean, you're hearing about tax credits, so if your kids play in sports, that you get a tax credit of up to $1,000. I'm a hockey dad, and I can tell you no new kid's playing hockey because of that. No new kid is going to play hockey. It's about swing voters, and it's about politics instead of investing in childcare, dental care, pharma care, things that are going to actually make a difference. When it comes to annual income, I'd love to get there someday, but we got to start with these basic things first and get the ball rolling. I think it would be too hard for our economy to move into something that might be upwards of $70 billion is what my understanding is for a guaranteed annual income. So I know they tried it in Manitoba and it went really well in the 70s. So let's get a pilot project going on that.
Thank you, Gord. Sean?
Absolutely, yes. Guaranteed livable income. It's money in the pockets of people who need it most. How are we going to pay for it? Well, you know, the Green Party, again, I'll say, the Green Party is not going to raise taxes on lower and middle class incomes. We are going to find money that's leaking out of the system and has been leaking out of the system for a long time. And these people and companies that we're going after, they can afford expensive lawyers and expensive accountants that you and I cannot afford. And we're going to give the CRA the funding it needs and the direction it needs to go after that money that's leaking out of the system. There is money there. We just have to stand up as people and let them know that we want it to happen. That's it.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
Well, I think it's not a matter that can be addressed while maintaining the current insane system that we have. The cost of living, Byron says that people should live within their means. If your housing is out of reach, if your medications are out of reach, if childcare is impossible, and if home care is out of reach, you don't have the means to take care of those things. Government should be investing in and providing affordable housing, establish a medication system, not just pharmacare, not just a single payer, but actually take over and provide medications. Have a national pharmaceutical company that does the research and produces the drugs so that they can't be pulled out from under you. Then the question of affordability becomes a very, very different question. You can provide a guaranteed annual income when people can live within their means because government has invested in those things that are needed.
Thank you, Barb. As the province struggles to build enough homes for its growing populations, more workers and their families can't afford to buy a home and are increasingly unable to pay rents. The cost of housing is a particularly serious problem among younger, less skilled, and immigrant workers. If elected, will your government create affordable, subsidized housing for vulnerable workers in Canada's most expensive housing markets? And we will start with Byron.
So a new Conservative government wants to help people with the dream of home ownership. We're going to fix the mortgage stress test to make it easier for home buyers to access mortgages and to renew their mortgages. We're going to increase amortization periods for first-time home buyers for up to 30 years to lower their monthly payment. We're going to launch an inquiry into money laundering in the real estate industry that may be artificially inflating prices. And finally, we're going to make surplus federal real estate here on the island, here in the Comox Valley, available for affordable housing. We're going to work with local government to fund their affordable housing initiatives. I see Jin Lin here in the room today. I toured Maple Pool about 2 weeks ago and saw the new container homes that are there. We need to do everything we can to try to get people into housing. How can you contribute to society? How can you get a job if you don't have a place to live? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
I talked earlier about our plan to build 500,000 non-market housing units over 10 years, so I think I'm going to leave it with that. But the free market clearly is not going to solve this problem. So this idea that we're going to lower fuel costs and that's going to solve this issue, I don't believe it. Young people, seniors, everyone's being affected by it. And we need to really treat it like it is as a crisis. And also people that are falling through the cracks, that are ending up on the streets, the cost of that is enormous. I tell this story about this guy, John, that I met in Courtenay-Alberni, who drank every day, and he'd end up on the street, and first responders would come, fire, police, ambulance, pick him up, take him up to West Coast General Hospital, keep him in an acute care bed, or run him through x-rays, put him back in cells, and release him. The next day he'd be at it again. Let's call it $2,000 a day. Even $600,000 a year, the cost to society. Port-Alberni Shelter Society put them in low barrier housing, $6,000 a year. So when people think it's not their problem, it's everybody's problem. And as elected officials, we're also responsible for your taxes, but looking after people, giving them dignity, number one.
Thank you. Sean?
When I worked at Arc'teryx, I sat on a green committee. It was about 9 years ago, and Arc'teryx makes amazing outdoor jackets that keep you dry, use Gore-Tex. And they had big rolls of Gore-Tex that they were going to throw out. They were going to discard it because it was a couple of years old and it's not going to work with the new products. And I was sitting around the table and I was thinking, well, so we have this Gore-Tex we're going to throw out. We live in Vancouver. It's one of the rainiest cities in the world, and we have a growing homeless population. What could we possibly do with this waterproof material with a homeless population in a rainy city? And so we ended up designing ponchos and handing them out to people who needed them most in downtown Eastside, Vancouver. And while it's not a home, it will keep them dry at night when they're sleeping on the streets. There shouldn't be anyone sleeping on the streets. That's a temporary solution. It's a Band-Aid solution. And I kind of like to use the analogy, if people are drowning in the river, we keep pulling them out of the river. Well, why not go up the river a little bit and figure out why they're falling in the river in the first place?
Thank you. Barb?
So the free market housing is a haven for speculators, and that should be brought under control. I want to hammer once again on seniors housing, and very specifically on Comox Valley Seniors Village and retirement concepts. When those homes were sold, I think there were 24 of them. So say there's an average of 100 people living in each of those homes. That's 2,400 homes. The arrangement that was made was that the purchaser, NBang Insurance, had to maintain those homes for a period of something like 5 years. I don't remember the exact number. After that, There's no guarantee that those places will even be maintained as seniors' residences. They could be turned into anything else, any kind of speculation, any kind of market housing. So we need to regulate various aspects of the housing market to make sure that the rights of people to affordable housing are guaranteed, and that it's not a matter of individual ability to pay.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
So I'm very excited about a couple of the initiatives that have been brought forward. The first idea was the first-time homebuyers incentive, which was brought in this year. And one of the announcements that was made on the campaign trail, I was there in Victoria, was that in places like Metro Vancouver and Metro Victoria will increase the amount that a house can be worth and what we'll pay for 10%. To the first-time homebuyers incentive says that the government will give you 10% to put towards the value of that home as a down payment. Along with that, I agree with Byron here that the stress test does need to be fixed. Amazing, a liberal and a conservative getting along. And then finally, we're going to put a 1% speculation tax on those who do not live in Canada, are not Canadian residents, and refuse to rent out their homes. That sounds like speculation to me, rampantly, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. If elected, how will you work to address climate change and a transition to a sustainable green economy? And we'll start with Gord.
I touched on it earlier. We've got a document, Power to Change, but I think first we have to, no one party is going to solve this problem. This is a global crisis. We have to work together. I've been part of a thing called the All-Party Climate Caucus in Ottawa, and out of 338 MPs, about 30 people have signed up. About 12 of us actually show up on a regular basis. And we have to work together. So our plan is to, obviously, to invest heavily in clean energy, to create a climate bank, $3 billion climate bank, $15 billion plan to transform our economy. The money's there. I mean, we wrote off the Liberal government wrote off $6 billion to large corporations just in the last year, including GM, and GM pulled jobs out of Oshawa. I mean, we've got to stop these corporate giveaways. We've got to end fossil fuel subsidies once and for all. That's a ton of money that shouldn't be going out of your pockets to subsidize big corporations. We shouldn't be buying a leaky pipeline that nobody wants. No one wanted to buy it. I mean, there's a lot of money going out the door that should be going directly into clean energy.
Thank you, Gord. Sean?
If you have a computer at home, go to greenparty.ca, download the entire platform, and browse through it. But Mission Possible is what the Green Party calls its plan to address the climate crisis. We want zero net emissions by 2050. We want to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees. The idea is that our planet is warming up too much. We're losing glaciers, we're losing our ice caps, and we really need to start curbing our fossil fuel emissions. We do not need to build a new pipeline for $10 to $13 billion. Let's move the money into a more sustainable green technology, move the workers to more sustainable green technology, including home retrofits, wind, solar, get ahead of the curve, and make electric vehicles more affordable, make electric bicycles more affordable. I don't know if any of you noticed, I rode an electric bicycle with an inflatable orca on a trailer, and I rode them from Tofino to Ucluelet to Port Alberni to Nanoose up to Courtenay and Cumberland, and it was just a breeze with the technology.
Thank you. Barb?
So I think the critical thing in transitioning to a sustainable economy is in the various communities across the country. The decision has to be put into the hands of those people who are facing the problems and dealing with the community. In Alberta, it's the oil sands workers. Don't kid yourself that the oil sands workers are a bunch of morons that are listening to politicians fight over pipeline or no pipeline. These are people who make their living in doing a certain kind of work. They are aware that there's a transition away from that kind of work. How that transition should be carried out should be largely in the hands of those workers. They'll figure it out. We collectively have the intelligence and the ability to figure out how to do this transition, as long as it's in our hands and not in the hands of those who see whether it's fossil fuels or not fossil fuels, how can they profit from it, and that's all they care about.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
So I think here you have to look to what our children have done and being in the streets. The climate marches show you that this is an absolutely critical issue. The target is 2050 for for carbon neutrality. How we're going to do it is by making it legally binding 5-year targets so that we cannot miss ever. You have to consistently keep moving forward towards neutrality. How is that going to happen? We're going to plant 2 billion trees. We're going to cut clean tech companies' taxes by 50%, and we're going to preserve Canada. 25% of the ocean will be protected by 2025. When we came into power, it was 1% in 2015. It's currently 14%. We're going to do the same on land and preserve 25% of Canada's land by 2025. Both targets will move to 30% for 2030.
Thank you, Jonah. Byron?
The Liberal carbon tax is not working. The Parliamentary Budget Office says it would need to increase by 5 to 7 times to meet the 2030 targets. The NDP and the Greens have not told us how much they would increase a carbon tax to get to their targets. We're only 1.6% of global emissions. Canada could be carbon neutral tomorrow, and China will continue to burn dirty coal that represents 50% of emissions. Doesn't mean we don't do anything. A Conservative government will significantly tighten emission standards for major polluters in Canada compared to what the Liberals have right now. But the key is to export and develop Canadian green technology that can displace dirtier options globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Byron. Do you believe that a rigid requirement to balance the budget removes flexibility from the government in tough fiscal times? And we'll start with Sean.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you believe that a rigid requirement to balance the budget removes flexibility for the government in tough fiscal times?
Absolutely.
Barb?
What he said. I think of a country like Cuba. Cuba has been suffering under a U.S. blockade and has gone through periods which they call the special period, which a lot of you have probably visited Cuba. I know friends of mine that visited Cuba took toilet paper and soap during this special period. A government has to be able to react to the reality that it faces in terms of both internal problems and external problems. So to have a blueprint and a formula that says you must do this and you mustn't do that doesn't make any sense. The key issue is, what's the aim? How do you develop your economy? In whose interests? Once that is settled and it's not in the interests of foreign investors, then you can figure out, do you need to run a deficit? Do you not need to run a deficit? So I think the question is a bit off.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
I believe that taking options off the table limits the government's effectiveness. I think that, specifically speaking, that a deficit is one of the tools that government can use to help in cases like a recession or a depression. I think governments have a duty to respond then and spend to help stimulate the economy. I believe government has a role in the economy, so I believe that deficits should not be taken off the table.
Thank you. Byron?
Governments have to do what's best for the people, so that should always be an option for a government. But deficits do matter. Everyone in this room runs a household budget or has run a business, and you understand you can't borrow indefinitely. Ultimately, a greater portion of your revenues go towards paying interest payments to bondholders as opposed to money going towards helping people, healthcare, social programs, fixing the opioid crisis. We can't keep running the budget deficits that some of the parties here are predicting. But when you're the NDP or the Greens and you have no realistic chance of forming government, it's easy to make these promises and say, we're going to offer you all these free things, and we're going to find these corporations and rich people to pay for it. It doesn't always work out that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Gord?
The cost of not investing in people is enormous. Every dollar spent on prevention saves $7 in the criminal justice system, $5 on the healthcare system, and this is for people that fallen through the cracks, that are living with mental health and addictions. So investing in people is really important. Investing in affordable housing, pharmacare, it saves people, the healthcare system, when people don't get the medicine they need. Dental, we've had $155 million nationally, people with dental emergencies. Investing in mental health, I mean, you can't put a cost to suicide. You know, the second biggest killer amongst youth is suicide. So we have to start investing in people, legislating no deficits and not investing in people. The long run, we're going to save the money. But if we should be legislating anything, it should be climate targets. And we should have a Climate Accountability Act and office that's monitoring that. That's the only thing that we should be legislating right now. And we owe it to our children.
Thank you, Gord. If elected, how would you provide leadership to end the current increasing homelessness crisis? Start with Barb.
Well, that's easy. Invest in social housing, invest in training and education, lift people out of poverty through guaranteed income, and in an all-rounded manner address the problems that lead to homelessness. There are some people that are homeless because of mental health issues, addiction issues. Those people need to be cared for properly and not treated as if they are lesser or not worthy, because this is something that we do. We put people into, say, addiction treatment, and then when it doesn't work, we curse the person and say, okay, well, that's it for you. Back onto the streets. When we don't treat any other illness in that same manner. So homelessness has many aspects to it, and investing in affordable housing, training, and other social programs is what's needed to address homelessness.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
We were all in Port-Alberni earlier today, and one of the things I did while I was there was visit the Friendship Center. They deal with the most disadvantaged in Port-Alberni and definitely open their doors to all of them. And they were describing it as a system. If you stay on track in the system, you're fine. But if you ever fall off, the system leaves you behind entirely. Homelessness starts long before you become homeless. There's underpinnings that have caused that to happen. It's about not leaving people behind. It's about making sure that our youth get educated. It's about making sure that we have drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs. It's about addressing the entire system that causes homelessness and not specifically looking at just what we see at the end product.
Thank you. Byron?
Homelessness has sadly become an epidemic in our communities across this riding. And when you look at some of the issues underneath it, whether it's mental health or addiction, a new Conservative government wants to invest in that. As part of our safe community strategy, we need to help people who are trapped in the cycle of addiction. How can they ever get out unless we extend them a hand, give them appropriate treatment facilities, appropriate second phase housing for them to live in and to wean them off their addiction? How can they ever be a productive member of our community and feel part of our social fabric? So a big part of homelessness is treating mental health and treating addiction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
Yeah, since the Liberals and the Conservatives, well, it was started with the Liberals, got out of non-market housing in the 90s. All we've seen is more increasing amounts of homelessness. We've lost 25 years, which is 500,000 non-market units. I mean, of course people are falling through the cracks. Real estate's gone up 50% just over the last 3 years in our riding, or say 4 years, let's call it. I know people that are seniors that are living in a trailer, worried about the regional district catching them. They have nowhere to go. They're going to end up on the street. So the free market isn't going to solve these problems. And we've talked about people that are running into mental health and addictions. Of course you're going to have mental health challenges when you have nowhere to live and you're more prone to addiction. And the cost of addiction is huge. I talked about the dollar preventative side that saves us $12 in the system later. And drug reform, I hope we get a question on it, because it is the biggest crisis we're facing in terms of healthcare in our country. We've lost over 4,000 people last year due to the opioid crisis, and it should be one of the #1 issues we're talking about today.
Thank you, Byron. Or Gord. Sean?
I think I've covered, homelessness quite a bit tonight. So I'd like to talk to one of the other points that was made, that the Greens aren't going to form government, so they can say whatever they want. Well, on May 6th, when Paul Manley was the second MP for the Green Party elected, we saw that changed the entire conversation in Canada. So you don't have to vote against something. You can vote for something. That's how the system works, and the government can work with multiple parties at the table. That's what the government is going to look like on October 22nd, and we can get things done working together. When healthcare came in this country with Tommy Douglas, it was not a majority government. It was a coalition or supply and confidence agreement like we have here in BC, and we're getting things done here, and we're going to be able to get things done in Ottawa on October 22nd. Vote Sean Wood.
Thank you. In keeping with Gord's comments, what will you or your party do to address the fentanyl overdose crisis? And we'll start with Jonah.
First off, the opioid crisis entirely is going to take funds. That takes national leadership, obviously, but it's more than that, obviously, as I just spoke about. No one sets out to get addicted to opioids, and it's a terrible situation that they find themselves in. So it's about addressing things, not just dealing with the crisis now, but let's deal with the deeper underlying issues that have caused this situation to develop, and let's attack those so that after we tackle this one, hopefully we don't have to tackle the next one when it comes around again.
Thank you. Byron?
In my last answer, I talked a little bit about what we're going to do to actually help people who are struggling with addiction and mental health issues. But to solve the opioid crisis, you need a comprehensive approach, and the Conservative Party has that. We need to support the RCMP with equipment and resources. We need to crack down on the gangs that are putting this deadly drug throughout our communities. We need to help with border security and border surveillance, just to try to stop the flow of these illicit drugs that are destroying families in our community. So it's really, you have to take a comprehensive approach to tackle it. You got to help people who are addicted. You have to go after the criminals who are pushing it, and you have to try to stop it from getting into Canada in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. Gord?
Well, it's a crisis, and we talk about our crime rates going up, and really, you talk to any police officer, they're going to tell you we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem, that most of the crime that's happening is people trying to feed their addiction. We are all being touched. We all know somebody that's been affected by this crisis. It's not far from any of us. In Portugal, they've got a different model. They decriminalized. They created therapeutic communities, housing for people that were living with addictions, and support for them. They decriminalized drugs. They took a transformational societal change to the approach. And what I learned is we're 79 times more likely to die of an addiction in British Columbia than Portugal. 7 times means we got it wrong. 79 times means someone needs to be held accountable. We have 4 medical health officers in BC. The chief medical health officer, BC Nurses Union, asking us to decriminalize. If we're not listening to our medical health officers, paid professionals, experts on science-based and evidence-based decision-making to take action and change, what are we doing?
Thank you, Gord. Sean?
Well, the war on drugs has been a complete failure. We've tried for years and years, and it's not working. So what Gord talked about, Portugal model, it is working for them. It's not perfect, but it's working. I've had a I had a cousin, he worked at a prison, he was a guard, and he went home one weekend and he celebrated New Year's Eve a little too heavily, and he was found dead in his apartment the next morning. I have another cousin, and she went to the very expensive Nanaimo Treatment Center, and she eventually did kick the habit, and she's a successful manager of a small restaurant. So we don't give up on people. We need to give them shelter. We need to give them the full support they need to kick the habit. It is a decision that they have to make themselves, but we can at least lead the horse to water and hope the horse takes a drink. And we want to decriminalize all drugs. That removes the stigma, so at least we can talk about it. Okay?
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
So it boggles my mind that the Canadian police forces, with all the power that they have, cannot stop the flow of illegal drugs into Canada. So I think someone should have a look at that and see, maybe we should be spending more resources on protecting people against the drugs that are coming in than going after the environmentalists. There should be far more, in the current situation, there should be far more people trained in the use of naloxone. It's now given to pharmacists and in drugstores, but there are a lot more places that people should have naloxone kits. We should listen to the mothers of the youth that are needing assistance and pay attention to what they're asking for, the mothers and the fathers, and pay attention to what they're asking for and providing that, because an awful lot of the deaths that have occurred in BC recently have occurred in situations where the parents had actually said, this is what we need, and didn't get it.
Thank you,
and my
Barb.
time's up.
Thank you. In BC, 60% of all private sector employment is provided by small and medium-sized businesses, 45% of the total economic output, and 35% of the province's GDP. What specific measures will you introduce to help small businesses thrive? And we'll start with Byron.
As I mentioned in my previous question, small business is the backbone, and your statistics point that out. The Trudeau Liberals raised the payroll tax. They implemented they called small business owners tax cheats. We're going to repeal the Trudeau Liberals' tax increases on small business investments. We're going to exempt spouses from Trudeau's tax increases on small business dividends, because often in small businesses, a husband and wife or a couple will work together in that business, and they should not be penalized. We're going to reduce federal regulation that makes it harder for small business to kind of get ahead. We're going to reduce it by 25%. We're the party for small business in Canada. We want to help small business thrive, flourish, invest, and hire people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
Right. Well, I was self-employed for 14 years, and later I became the executive director of the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. And so I've been around small business. We had a robust chamber. We were runner-up for Chamber of the Year out of 130 chambers in BC because we work together. And we've got to work together because small business is the backbone. It's the job creator in our country right now because we've lost a lot of middle-class, good-paying jobs that aren't there anymore, so people have had to go out and create their own jobs. So I was talking earlier about championing reducing merchant fees, working on the small business family transfer, but really we need to invest in people, and no one's closer to their employees than small business. So pharmacare, dental care, affordable housing, these are actually critical elements to supporting small business. So I'll continue to advocate for small business because this is their priority. And I helped found the Entrepreneur Caucus in Ottawa. We heard from lots of entrepreneurs and also, tourism related industry business. They say housing's the biggest issue and also finding employees.
Thank you. Sean?
I've had a long couple of days doing driving all over the riding, doing these all candidates. So I think we've already answered this question, and I think I've already talked to small business, but if you do want to know more, come and see me after. I'm going to steal this time to talk about volunteer firefighters across Canada. Firefighting across Canada, 83% of firefighters in Canada are volunteer. They're the backbone of first responders across Canada. The federal government gives them a little bit of a tax break, which works out to $450 that those volunteer firefighters, men and women, don't have to send to Ottawa. I'd like to increase that to $2,450 that they don't have to send to Ottawa from working their other jobs. What this does is saves municipalities money, gives them, the firefighters, a little bit of a thank you. Saves municipalities money from going career departments because it's very expensive. So it helps you on your property taxes and gives volunteer firefighters across Canada a bit more of a thank you for the hard work they do.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
So I think this is a problem that small business owners are best suited to describe what it is that they need, but I had an interesting conversation with people not too long ago, and this may be completely outside of the box and it may be completely something that wouldn't work, but from my perspective, I had a thought. So restaurants in Courtenay, some of them are closing because they can't get staff. The workers that work in the restaurants can't work in those restaurants because they don't get enough hours to pay for housing, to pay for childcare. So if we invest in housing, and we invest in childcare, and we invest in public transit, and then we get the small business owners to get together, we don't do it, the small business owners get together and look at how can we have employees that work in more than one restaurant. If you work in the restaurant that's open in the morning, and then in the afternoon you work in the restaurant that's open in the afternoon, would you not end up with a full-time job and the restaurant owner would be able to still keep their hours? It just occurred to me as, how come we don't think of these kinds of things?
Thanks, Barb. Jonah?
So I'm proud of the record with small businesses. We did cut small business taxes from 11 to 9%, but we're going to take some further steps. One of the things we're going to do is eliminate swipe fees for small businesses on GST and HST. That's going to save small businesses across the country $500 million a year. Along with that, we want to set up a voluntary real-time e-payment system with Service Canada so that small business owners can do what they do best, run their business and not have to worry about payroll so often. Another thing we're going to do is cut clean tech companies' taxes by 50%. And finally, and the one that I'm really excited to talk about, we're going to give out 2,000 grants across the country worth $50,000 for people to set up small businesses, because something we need to encourage is small business, and that's 2,000 a year that we can start seeing built across the country, and that's giving them a chance to get into the market. Thank you.
Thank you. The Trans Mountain Pipeline has overcome multiple regulatory and legal challenges and has been approved by the federal cabinet. Will your government commit to supporting the Trans Mountain Pipeline project to its proposed completion in 2022? And starting with Gord.
No, absolutely. We are totally opposed to it. We've been opposed to it from the get-go. They haven't got free, prior, and informed consent from Indigenous communities. And you know, like every other project that they're trying to ram through communities, I mean, we heard from the Prime Minister that it was going to be communities don't give permits, I believe it was, but they don't give approval. I mean, government doesn't, well, anyways, I blew that. But the reality is, I wouldn't run a project through your backyard if you didn't want it. And we have to respect Indigenous rights. We have to make sure that we're meeting real climate action and investing in clean energy and putting our ocean at risk. 100,000 marine jobs, you know, to increase bitumen shipping by 7-fold in the Salish Sea doesn't make sense. We don't know how to clean up bitumen. So I'm completely opposed to this expansion, and we need to go the other direction and stop investing in fossil fuel infrastructure and invest in clean energy.
Thank you. Sean?
Justin Trudeau spent your money on an old pipeline that no other company wanted to buy. Now, that doesn't sound like a great investment to me, but if you're one of the shareholders of that pipeline, I'm sure you were quite happy at getting top dollar for it. I had a neighbor, and he was working in Fort McMurray, and it was price per barrel was about $110 a barrel, and he was making good money. You know, I think a lot of them have a good time in town in the weekend, but he was laid off also under Stephen Harper when price per barrel dropped to, say, $42, and that was all under Stephen Harper. Had nothing to do with the new pipeline, nothing to do with the Green Party, nothing to do with Elizabeth May or protesters or anything else. The price per barrel of oil is what is dictating how that economy works for us, how that industry works for us. And it is a sunset industry. We need to invest in our future instead of trying to invest in our past.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
So what we're talking about with Trans Mountain Pipeline is not the pipeline itself, but the expansion of the pipeline. The objection, or the main objection that has been raised by the First Nations who have gone back to court yet again on this, is the increase in tanker traffic and the danger of oil spills. We have been sold, well, we haven't been sold because we haven't bought it. We have been offered a bill of goods that says that Canada will have a first-class response to oil spills. We didn't see it with the Nathan E. Stewart. That was a pretty small spill. We didn't see it in English Bay. That was an even smaller spill. Why would we possibly accept that we're going to have the technology and the people to clean up the oil spill, which will happen at some point with this project? And don't kid yourself that this bitumen is going to Asia. This bitumen is destined for California, for the U.S. war machine. Another reason to oppose it.
Thank you, Barb. Jonah?
So we bought a pipeline. Everyone knows this, and it is always the elephant in the room that is fun to talk about. It's about getting goods to market, and we did invest in spill response. We are being a leader on that. We will still meet our climate targets, even including building this pipeline. And we are investing in clean technologies going forward. So I believe we're doing a very balanced and fair approach to this.
Thank you, Jonah. Byron?
So the Liberals failed to provide a reasonable regulatory framework. They failed to adequately consult with Indigenous Canadians to get it built, and they were forced to buy it themselves. The reality is the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the risks are not outweighed by the rewards. It's going to provide $6.7 billion in tax revenue. That's money that can be used to fight climate change, to support our hospitals, our schools. The best part about twinning the pipeline is that $1 billion will be available for spill response. That's boats in the water in Port-Alberni, in Ucluelet. We already have super tankers coming by our west coast. We already have 500 tankers coming through the Strait of Juan de Fuca every year. We don't have adequate spill response, and we will if we build the pipeline.
Thank you. As we approach the end of the evening, the last question will either be the easiest or the hardest. At the end of the day, all of you are up here looking to be the representative of the Comox Valley-Alberni riding. Tell us the one attribute that you display that makes you the person to represent us in Ottawa. And we will start with Sean.
I think you have to be an honest leader, or else what's the point of making any promises or telling people you can get anything done at all? So I would go with honest. I'm going to use my time to talk about the 500 tankers that are currently in our water. They're not 500 tankers with diluted bitumen. They might be light crude or something else that's easy to boom and vacuum up. Diluted bitumen is not like that. Diluted bitumen, look up the Kalamazoo River spill when you get home and you'll see what diluted bitumen does. To get the heavy tar stuff to go through the pipeline, they put diluents in it, which is really bad benzenes and other flammable materials that are top secret. The formula's top secret. You don't even know what it is. They burn off, and then the bitumen itself will sink to the bottom, and you'd have to dredge the Salish Sea to clean it up. Not possible to clean it up. We do not have 500 tankers of diluted bitumen going in our channels right now. That's a lie.
Thank you, Sean. Barb?
Okay, so the question was the one attribute that I have that means you should vote for me. So the one attribute I have is that I don't think any party should be elected to come to power. I think we need to change our electoral system so that it's the citizens who elect their representatives, who are people that they know and people that they choose to represent them, and that when they go to Parliament, they may belong to a political party, but they do not act as a representative of that political party. They do not act as the voice of that political party. They act as the representative of their citizens. So I would represent you in that way, but forget about me. Think about future elections, because this one is going to go the way the others have all gone. Think about future elections. Think about choosing someone from your community that you know, that you trust, that's been proven, that will represent you. And don't care what party they represent. That's, you know, parties are one thing. Parties are primary organizations that
Thanks,
get
Barb.
people together.
Jonah?
So what's the one thing I believe I hold that the others don't on stage? I believe I bring a balanced approach. I listen to everybody, and then I make a decision based on listening to that and considering both sides and listening to the arguments presented. I'm going to provide a story here of I'm relatively the boring person in my family. This weekend was my father's birthday, so all of my siblings got together. What was the interesting point they made about me? They decided that I was the dinner roll at a banquet. You're always there, you're always consistent, and everyone takes you, but no one really thinks you're the most sexy thing on their plate that they're eating that night. So, balanced, that is what I bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah. Byron?
So 2 qualities that will help me serve you as MP is I'm a good listener. The last 12 months, I've been on an unpaid leave, walking around the riding. I've met over 9,000 people at their door, and I've listened to their concerns to really understand all the communities, from Denman to Ucluelet, Port Alberni. I've attended all of the councils. I've met all the mayors in our riding, just to understand what the local issues are, because they actually know their communities best. The other quality is I'm a team player. Any success that I've had in my life has come from building teams, working together, finding a win-win situation where I can work with others and get to a great result, whether it's on a project or on a transaction. And I believe that skill set would really help me deliver real results for the Comox Valley. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gord?
I think my experience of bringing people together, I think that's my number one asset, and believing in people. You know, in this riding, you know, we've had record success in bringing infrastructure dollars. Went from $1.5 million a year on average for the 11 years under the Conservatives with a majority Conservative MP to $25 million a year. And it's because of the great leaders, the great mayors in the back room, and the people we've got in our communities, finding out what they need and finding a way forward. We had 2 motions passed unanimously. The first MP to do that in a standing vote in 25 years. One on plastics that led to a single-use plastics ban and ghost and derelict fishing gear initiative. The other on ending lap spending on veterans, which the Conservative leader Andrew Scheer voted for and all of his colleagues. An Indigenous Auxiliary Coast Guard program, working with First Nations. A training program at Pacific Coast University in Port Alberni to train injured vets. And to get rid of those abandoned and derelict vessels that the Conservatives promised they'd get rid of in Deep Bay. We did that.
Thank you. We're now at the candidates' closing remarks. They were drawn as well, and the first speaker is Jonah.
So I'd like to thank you first for all coming out and listening to us. Democracy works best when we're all engaged, and it's tremendously helpful for you to be here, and it's been very good going around the riding just how engaged Courtenay-Alberni truly is. I'd also like to then thank Bill and the Chamber for putting this on. Without you, this doesn't happen, so thank you to you and all the volunteers who've helped out to make tonight successful. I'd also like to thank my fellow candidates as well for showing up, being here, and participating. I think it's time for my generation of leaders to step forward and serve. This is how I want to help serve Canada. Each of them, and politicians for generations, have promised to make things better for their children. I don't have children, hopefully one day, but my promise to you is that I will make choices in the best interest of the long-term future.
Thank you, Jonah. Sean?
So we saw on May 6th that Paul Manley was elected in Nanaimo Ladysmith, and the country took notice that a second Green MP was elected. Official opposition in Prince Edward Island is Green. There's 3 Green MLAs in New Brunswick. There's 3 Green MLAs here in BC. There's a Green MPP in Ontario. And I think that ethical, honest, hardworking leadership is key. I am running for the most honest, ethical, hardworking party leader in Canada, in Elizabeth May. She's the longest serving party leader, and it is my honor to run for her. And I would love to see Vancouver Island go completely green on October 21st, and you could have a Vancouver Island Green Caucus that would get together and represent every riding here on the island. I think that would be an amazing thing to see, and we would listen to constituents, and we would do what is best in your interests. We would push that those policies in Ottawa.
Thank you,
Vote for
Sean.
Sean Wood.
Next is Byron.
So Canadians have lost faith in Justin Trudeau. The Greens and the NDP are at less than 14%. That means less than 1 in 7 Canadians believe they should be elected. And you know what? Canadians are right. Their plans would devastate our economy. A vote for the NDP or the Greens will just keep Justin Trudeau in power, and I don't believe he deserves another 4 years. We have a new generation of conservative leaders that will fight climate change with green technology, that will make your life more affordable, that will respect our veterans and make our communities safer. As your MP in a new conservative government, I will fight for discretionary spending. I will give you a seat at the table in Ottawa. I will help fight for funding for CFB Comox, for the airport, for agriculture in the valley. I'll work with Mayor Bob Wells and his council to help deal with traffic congestion here in Courtenay. I'm from Vancouver Island. I love it here. I've got business, legal, political experience, and I would be honored to serve as your member of parliament. Thank you very much.
Gord?
So I keep hearing this idea from the Conservative Party that you need someone in government to get things done. And I'll forgive my friend and colleague here from the Conservative Party because he moved to our riding last year and he wasn't here to witness the damage the Conservatives did in the decade to our riding, to our communities. When I talked to the New Chalmouth people and I asked them and I look and see that they weren't mentioned, the previous member of Parliament didn't even say New Chalmouth once in the House of Commons. When they said they had no voice and they felt invisible, they meant it. I've raised their issues at least 48 times. No one wants, and I hear this on the doorstep, even Conservatives don't want a majority government. We need someone holding the balance of power that put people and the environment at the table. That's what you're going to get from me. Someone who's on your side. Someone who's going to be fighting for the to deal with the opioid crisis, the housing crisis, affordability crisis, and taking climate change seriously. That's what you're going to get from me. And I promise you, as a squeaky wheel MP, I'll represent every one of you. Doesn't matter which party you're with.
Thank you, Gord. On behalf of the Comox Valley Chamber, I'd like again to thank our sponsors. Oh, sorry, Barb. See, it's been a long night. I apologize. You're the last name, and I didn't write it down. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, our party's slogan for the election is empower yourself now and humanize the natural and social environment. So what do we mean by that? Humanizing the social environment is rejecting the system which excludes us from political decisions. Imagine you had a dinner party and at the door when your guests arrive, you told them that they could not discuss any topics except those that you had authorized and that they could only speak for 1 minute. It's nuts. You are reduced to Your participation in political decision making is reduced to voting once every 4 years. There's not even a forum where the community can come together and say these are the issues in our riding. Everything is decided for you as if you're a bunch of morons. So that's not acceptable. It's not modern. Our system needs modernization, renovation, and in the meantime, all of us are engaged in things that are important to us. I've been a healthcare worker since 1972, retired earlier this year, and my time is up.
I was going to give you 4 seconds because I didn't give it to you. Thanks, Barb. And I do apologize. On behalf of the Chamber, though, I do want to thank our sponsors. The Comox Valley Record, Toastmasters for doing the timing, my tech guys for the live streaming. We also have some young youth in the audience that's going to be part of our tech crew. They were great. They had an amazing job for us tonight. So thank Nolan and Timothy on the tech side. And then we have Olin and Stefan who helped with the setup. And these are the future people that'll be coming here, making the votes in a couple years, and then maybe sitting at this table a couple years after that. On behalf of everyone present, I would like to extend our appreciation and thanks to the candidates. Sitting up here, taking that responsibility to seek office is not to be taken lightly, and your honest and frank answers to the questions, sometimes that were difficult, was very much appreciated. Thank you all for your contribution to the process. Also, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for attending this forum. Hopefully it's given you a chance to learn a little bit more about the candidates, the issues, and their respective positions, but most importantly, you're active and engaged. We want you to come out and vote. We don't care who you vote for, but we do want you to vote. So on October 21st, make sure everybody that you know has been at a polling station, advanced or not, and is selected one of these individuals to represent us in Ottawa. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Enjoy your evening. Thanks.
Did you wonder why we had to keep taking your water jug, or did you figure it out? And every time we brought it back to you, you said thank you.
Yeah, it's like going, well.
But